Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who does or does not, because there is no try,
Tim Longo. Very nice.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that. No matter how trying you might be for me.
Oh, geez. Well, this game definitely pushed me to my limits in so many ways.
In fact, it might have pushed you well past your limits, since you ended up using a save of mine to get it finished.
It did. No, that's true. I actually, this was an epic fail for me, essentially. And we were under time crunch, so I mean, it's in retrospect, I think. Not that necessarily that we're going to dive right in, but maybe we are. I think playing this game, and I think saying that I played this game under duress is obviously overstating it. But there were times when I felt like that, because we want the podcast to come out on a regular basis, and we want it to come out at a good rhythm, and so we have to keep ourselves to that. But then we also have day jobs and other things, and families and stuff. So this is a challenging game to play weekly, with big chunks. And so both of us have some, conflicts next week. So we had to kind of up the schedule. And so I played every night this week to kind of, work to this recording tonight. And I didn't make it. I didn't make it in time. I made it, but I wasn't prepared. So,
right.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, I kind of jumped in, so I don't know,
No, that's fine. We should go right from there, because I actually had a very similar experience. We were talking offline, but when I originally played this game, and it being my first JRPG, I was not prepared either for the, sort of level of stuff that's going to happen at the end, and how ill prepared. And even playing my fourth or fifth one, I think, when I played Final Fantasy VIII, which is one I went back to, I still got to the end of that game and had not done nearly enough kind of side questing and things like that, and was just completely unprepared. And in Final Fantasy IX, that comes down to sort of not so much what gear you have on, or wielding, but what abilities you've managed to pick up along the way. And I think you probably just had missed a couple of key pieces of gear that make a big difference.
Because I think because it was interesting playing with your save, I was able to see a few things that you did, and the sorts of abilities that you have on, and I definitely missed them. And also, I don't know if it's you playing the other games, or if there's some. It kind of goes back to the theme that or the topic we've talked about a bunch of times, is that sort of like lexicon or understanding of a genre in an inherent way that, especially as developers, we take advantage of, and too much usually, whenever we're working on a specific genre, right? There's certain conventions that we're okay just sort of like assuming somebody will know. And, working on, both of us are working on first-person games or shooters and things, and there's certain things that you just don't worry as much about telling people,
Right. Well, and in fact, if you go against them, it can be a really big deal. I remember how much we argued about putting jump on the Y button on Republic Commando. Mm-hmm. Right. Remember what a big deal that was? Yeah. Because Halo had come out. Yep. And it had kind of established how the controller was going to work for first-person shooters, which continues to this day. Mm-hmm. And we took the jump and moved to the Y button because we felt that what did we put on the A button?
I think it
focus fire, maybe.
I think it was essentially our squad interact, right? Like that's how you used the maneuvers and. Right, I think that.
Oh, right, because you would hold the A button to use the directionals to do. Yeah, right. So it was the squad controls basically, but it was like a shift key, a modifier.
But and you could tap it to use the maneuvers, right? That were contextual. Right. But you're totally right. I hadn't thought about that until just now. And the debates, and I don't remember what side you fell on. But I remember my main argument for it was a sense of priority, right? It was about we're a squad game, right? And that's our focus. Right. And A is the most valuable button that we have other than the triggers. And so priority wise, that should be the one that we focus on. for that important thing that in our particular game, you end up using way more than jump anyway.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fell on that side as well, as I recall, because I was so I had just come off of a game which I had felt had made a huge mistake on the A button, a game that didn't ship, and had huge arguments with the designer and stuff on that game when Full Throttle 2 to be like, the A button can't be this throwaway thing. I was really like, do you not understand how games work? I was so frustrated, because it was a point and click team, that was working on that game, and they just, I was like, this is not, you can't make the A button some throwaway thing.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what it was now, but it was really truly like a meaningless action in the context of an adventure game, and I was like, this is not going to fly.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Well, and it just wraps back around to preconceived notions, and we talked about it maybe even in the first episode, where my my emphasis usually in RPGs, especially Western ones, is level, right? Like level tends to be the way that I gauge my progress and how well I would be doing against things. And, basically two things that I failed at for this last run and I broke two rules one rule I hadn't made a rule for because I didn't know I was going to need it, and that was using your save. But the other rule that I broke for myself for our podcast is I typically don't want to go after any facts, right? I don't want to go and look for hints. I want to play it as purely as possible. And it was like midnight last night, and I was like, I got to look some stuff up here. Like, something's wrong, because I just hitting my head, and I would make incremental progress. And by the way, I'm talking about the 4 chaos bosses at the end, which people probably are already assuming.
Chaos lords or whatever.
That people are probably already assuming that's what I'm talking about. And so I was making incremental progress with a few hints about how to use certain things that the game hadn't taught me up to that point. And my frustration and the bone that I have to pick here is, and I know that some of this is, older game, old school. Some of this, usability is and balancing and tuning is forgivable for that day. But I look back at other games that came out at this time, and it's not completely true, because there were definitely games that had better, messaging and kind of learning systems and to teach people along the way. So I get to this point, and I actually thought up to this point, I actually was fine or maybe even over leveled, because any of the random encounters and other bosses that I fought, I generally was fine. Like, I didn't have any trouble. Right. And then I hit this wall here. And I guess it started with that Nova Dragon thing that you first fight before the the Chaos Lords. But I was like, what, how? And then I had that dreaded moment. Oh no, I need to go grind. But I had no indication that was what was wrong. And then I play your save, and I realize it wasn't just grinding for levels. It's actually how I'm using the systems.
Right.
And you mentioned abilities, right? That was one. I dug into I actually went back to town at one point. I did a bunch of synthesizing of some stuff. I found a bunch of stuff to absorb. So I could, have at least some absorption gear on everybody, because each of the lords was a different element, which, was cool for sure, but it just wasn't enough. Anytime they did physical attack on me, I was dying too quickly. And so the cool thing about it, and the making lemonade moment for me with all of this, is it forced me, it did probably do what they intended it to do to some degrees. It forced me to puzzle my way through it. Meaning, okay, I really need to know what the counter for this thing is. And the example I'll give is reflect. There's the one snake kind of boss, and she puts reflect on herself a bunch. And I hadn't actually met that, and nobody had used that on me before. So I was just killing myself left and right. Vivi would throw something on it and just wipe out the party.
Yes, I did that once, actually. I cast like Meteor or something, which is the big spell he gets at the end. I forget if it's Meteor or something else. I think it's Meteor. I think Comet is a little weaker. And the same thing happened to me, and I went, oh, I just got reflected.
Yeah.
And I wiped. I mean, I totally wiped. I was like, that's not a good spell. And then I'm like, oh, I see. She didn't take any damage. I took a ton. I just missed her casting the reflect, and didn't realize. I could see it then. I was like, oh, I see the effect. I just missed it.
Yeah.
I just wasn't paying close enough attention. Yeah.
But then, and obviously I did some strategy hunting at that point. And then you realize, oh, you can cast reflect on your party and then cast the spell on the party member, and then it reflects back and negates the reflect she has on herself.
That's right.
And that was an awesome revelation. Like, I got to hand it to him. Like, those sorts of weird rock, paper, scissors combos of things, love it. It's just so frustrating. And again, playing kind of under duress where I was rushed, right? So it's not the best way to play, especially at the end, play the game. And I kind of knew at that point what I needed to do, but I ran out of time. So, and for the audience, I sent Brett a mail late last night. I was like, oh my God, I am so pissed. What are we going to do? And so, Brett had a good idea to send over a save. So, completely failed, super cheating, using another save, etc. But it was still educational, for me. And I still enjoyed it for sure. And I actually got pretty far into I think I got to the...
I think you said you had done 2 and you had done the Nova Dragon. So, basically 3 of those.
Yeah, I had
3
2 more
of the
left.
5 major bosses.
I had died on the water boss. So I had the water boss and then one after that. So, and I actually think I almost got the tentacle, guy down. Not Leviathan, I forget what the name was. And I'd almost gotten that one. Kraken. So I probably was close to beating that one, just using the puzzly aspects, even though I was under-leveled. So one of the points I wanted to make on this was, I think it's really cool that is a way to play, and that even being under-leveled, I was able to succeed if I was methodical and careful and really analytical about it. But then the funny thing about that, and one of the key notes I wrote down, that is kind of an interest. I think because this is our last episode for the playthrough, it applies to a theme across the game for my kind of newbie understanding. Is whether intentional or not, I feel like they have conflicting systems that I think probably people are yelling at their iPods when I say stuff like that, because people probably think that everything is pretty locked up for a JRPG system, and people love these games. But I feel like the concept that it encourages me to do these puzzly things with the systems, with the gear and the abilities and all of that stuff, encourages me to keep using those, thus not worrying about leveling up and kind of doing the grindy stuff. Because I think I subverted a lot of grind because I was using the puzzles. Right. And so therefore I get to this point where I'm not prepared. And so those two systems were kind of, like kind of conflicting with each other.
It's funny though, because I actually feel playing through this, I did a lot less grinding than I normally would have. But I did luck into finding...
Well, you did the Chocobo stuff though.
Right, but if you're riding a Chocobo, you don't get any monsters.
Oh, but I mean, you were getting special gear from that stuff, is what I meant.
Not the only thing I did get from that, I guess, was Vivi's costume, which is the robe of lords or whatever. But it's funny because once I got to the final boss, actually Vivi spent the whole time dead, which I kind of left him that way, knowing what was coming. Yeah. He cast like one spell in that final battle. Yeah. And then he got wiped out, and I just left him because I didn't want to take the time. I knew I could do tons of damage, each time through with my 2 fighters. I had actually thought I might use a different strategy, in terms of what I geared up for abilities. But the big things that really helped were, and I got the ultimate weapon too. That's true. So that was kind of a big deal. But for Steiner, I got Ragnarok, which I don't know if you had in your save.
I didn't find that one.
And I don't know I can't recall where I got that. So I'd have to look that up. But I got that, and I was like, oh, this is that one that gives me that really cool spell, the shock spell that is just, it does 10,000 every time. You know, you're just like, he is just a man at that point. Yeah. So there was that made a big difference. That was probably the one thing that made the biggest difference. And I remember the first time I played it going, oh, this is really cool. Now I can do tons and tons of damage with this tank. I just need to keep them alive, you know?
Yeah.
So it was all about building the abilities around people staying alive long enough to heal him, or, you know, whatever I could do to keep him alive, because he was just going to hammer. And so that's what I focused on last time. This time it was pretty much the same. And I guess with Zidane having the ultimate weapon, I could actually tank with him a bit. And that just left Dagger there healing as much as she could, because I guess I would throw out a fair amount of the... I would use Bahamut a lot too, to kind of go and do as much damage as she could do, but that just kind of sped the battles along. You know, it wasn't really necessary. I could have just kind of held her back and let her just do healing. Yeah, it was more like, oh, I have an opportunity here. You know, I'm taking a little risk. These people are a little low on health, but it was more just, you know, kind of churning through that and making kind of tactical decisions. But
well, I could be. I mean, I see what you mean. I definitely could be wrong in that, and I'm not trying to be overly critical about, you know, their design, because ultimately, educating me on how to best play the game, aside, if you put that separate, you know, aside, say I did know how to play. I mean, I definitely underutilized the systems, like the abilities and you know, and acquiring that stuff. I thought I had a lot of abilities, but you know, your save kind of showed me that I probably had, I don't know, 2/3 of what I probably should have had.
Right.
And regardless of grinding, you know, I just didn't. You know, I didn't focus on that enough, and I think in retrospect that would be where not grinding for level, but just you know, grinding to get that stuff.
Right. Well, I was always constantly managing. Like, I was always in the, you know, the after battle report was seeing the ability up, and I would go through. Like, whenever I saw an ability up, I would go and I'd look at everybody, and I'd hey, this person I can put, you know, I can add ability up to this person so they get the abilities more quickly. So I was always feeding that system as much as I possibly could.
I thought I was too. I totally did. Like, you know me, I'm super OCD and like anal about that stuff, and I kept on it. I think what it maybe was is I wasn't OCD enough and didn't go deep enough in looking and finding all the different gear items that I could that had abilities that I didn't currently have. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
like I would find the stuff that seemed the most valuable and powerful, and I would find the abilities that I had. But I think I probably could have done a better job synthesizing more stuff and spending time there. I mean, I usually spent all my money synthesizing and buying stuff, everything I saw, but when I did that last round of kind of just going from city to city looking to see what I missed, I definitely noticed stuff that I probably could have had a lot earlier. But yeah, it was just kind of an interesting thought that I was having, as far as like, the bummer is I really enjoy the rock, paper, scissors aspect of all of that stuff, and kind of pitting my wits against the boss and kind of outsmarting them. And it is really rewarding. I'd say more rewarding than boss fights I can think of in Western RPGs, where you actually, like, you put the right absorption stuff on your people, and then you put, like that reflect trick, and you put all these things on, and you're like, dude, I totally owned you, and I totally countered everything, and I mastered this boss, and that does feel really good. But it's just so opaque, and I just, I don't know. And truthfully, I also didn't really want to grind. Like, that was the kind of the inner turmoil I had, that I've always had with my understanding of JRPGs. Is like, I just don't want to be forced to do that. And the jump between
you do play World of Warcraft, don't you?
Shoot, you got me. That's a good point. No, that's a good point. I wonder what it is about MMOs specifically, because I'd actually in other RPGs I don't.
It's because you can see them, and you can pull them or not pull them.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? That's a huge difference, right? I mean, the frustrating part of JRPGs is with the random battles is that they subvert your goals. I have this goal, I'm going to do this thing, and along the way, I have this battle, and I have this other battle, and then, oh, God, I have another battle. Where was I going again? And so it's like, I'm just trying to get to that tree over there with the tornado around it, and I've had to stop 6 times, just to battle these creatures I don't care about. And I totally get that, and it's something they've largely eliminated in Final Fantasy 13. Certainly when you get to sort of the overworld, you can just kind of go around a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. If you're on the main path, you sort of have to fight a certain number of battles. They're not, you can't get around them. They're blocking your way and all this stuff.
Do you see them?
Yes, you can see them. Yeah. Yes.
Well,
and that makes a big difference too.
To your point, the other interesting, kind of little mini, revelation that I was having too with that. Because I'm trying to think if there's any other game or genre where there are random encounters. There must have been something else that I played not too long ago, separate from JRPGs. But it's such a funny thing to have negative reinforcement attached to something. Well, maybe we can debate negative reinforcement, but negative reinforcement attached to something so fundamental as moving. Moving your character is something you have to do to progress in the game, and you want to do because you want to progress the story, you want to, move forward in progress. But every time you move the stick, you might run into a battle that you don't want. So there's this weird tension moment where you're clenched up and you're like, oh, I don't want to fight right now. I don't want to fight right now. And then it comes in randomly and you're like, I hate moving. But it's like, you don't want the player to hate moving. It's like in a shooter, if it's like every time you fired your weapon, somebody was going to slap your face. It's like, I don't know. So I know I'm overstating it, but it was kind of a weird feeling that I didn't anticipate that, having for myself.
Yeah. Well, it is. And I think it is entirely because it subverts sort of these player goals and it's working against, the story you're telling yourself. And, it's sort of like eating your vegetables, right? I mean, ultimately doing this is good for you, as we've talked about. It can be used to charge the transmitter or whatever. You can do different sorts of things with it deliberately, or just to grind those abilities if you know there's some that you want. But especially when you get lost or something, it's the worst. Yeah. I mean, because you're like, not only can't I do what I want to do because I'm lost, now I can't do it because every time I take a few steps, I have to fight something else, which is sort of what you ran into in the Desert Palace last time. Is just like, I've got to light all these candles, but every time I move, I end up fighting one of these, I don't know, mind flayer dudes or whatever, and it's just so frustrating. Like it drives you crazy. I get it.
There's nothing more frustrating than being stuck on a puzzle and then being able to and to actually trial and error your way through the puzzle. You're actually being hit by encounters, and I know that something probably listeners are also screaming at me in that. I know that's kind of, to your point, that's kind of the point, right? It's like those random battles are how you fuel the engine, so to speak. And so there definitely were multiple moments where I caught myself kind of taking a deep breath, trying to be zen about it. It's like, these encounters are good. They're helping me. I need to take my medicine and all of that, and kind of making, like I said, lemonade out of lemons. And I just didn't embrace it enough. And as much as I really enjoyed the game, I think that there still is some weird, I'm way overthinking this, by the way, but there's still some weird hurdle or hump that I haven't gotten over because I'm such a Western RPG person that I think I will get over eventually as I play more of these. And the good news is I want to play more of them now because I see there's a lot of cool stuff in there that but I think there's still some walls that I have up. And yes, this week has probably exacerbated it because it was such a frustrating week. But anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, we both have time pressures. I'm going on a little vacation. You got some work stuff and some travel, so it's just,
Yeah.
it's
And
definitely
it came to a head. Yeah.
Whenever you're under that kind of time pressure, it's just not going to be the best scenario. I guess the last thing I want to talk a little bit about, before we go to a break, is to just kind of dive into the ending a little bit. We've kind of talked about the frustrations of the bosses, and definitely when I first played it, I was in the same place you were. And I had no recourse to a friend's save. So I was I was literally puzzling that stuff out. I mean, back at that time.
Yeah, it wasn't easy to get the info.
It wasn't, you couldn't just go watch a video. These days it's, there's somebody out there who's shown you the whole end of the game and what to do best. So let's, so I feel your pain. But as far as the ending goes, I mean, this is one of the most memorable endings in a game of my whole gaming career. It's one of those that has stuck with me. Andrew couldn't remember, our friend Andrew Kermsey couldn't remember if he had played this game. And I said, oh, come on, the thing where at the end of the game he's in the play and he calls out to her on the balcony. He's like, oh yeah, that one. Yeah. So he immediately was like, oh, of course, right. He just didn't. Yeah. He didn't remember which ones he had played by number or whatever. And I mean, there's something really, really lovely about the circularity of this game.
I'm impressed. I was super impressed, and for the listeners, like I literally finished before we're recording, so like I'm very fresh.
Yeah.
And I totally agree on the full circle aspect, and of course, as we talked a lot about theater throughout, this series, obviously close to my heart, and it was nice to see them return to that for sure, and that same play, and kind of the context, but then you have this cool. Foundation of all these events that have happened with these same characters. So it's the same characters doing the play and kind of watching the play, but then you have Dagger reversed role with her mother, right? Or the queen.
Her mother. Well, yeah. I mean, her adoptive mother.
Yeah. And so there's kind of just nice, cool symbolism in there. And then of course, I see the cloak figure. I know who the cloak figure is going to be. But it was just nice, nicely done. And it's just like, without being too cheesy, it was just sweet. It was just like right. a thoughtful, heartfelt, and you just don't get that. Like I got this, like the word the term fairy tale came to mind at the end, which other than the Ni no Kunis of the world and stuff like that, you just don't get that very much. And I really applaud them. And I also mentioned to Brett offline that from the time you kill that last boss. Neutron or I don't Necron. From that point to the credits is super long and elaborate, and you just got to hand it to teams that put that much love and care into every moment of the end. When it's that far in, 40 hours of the game.
Yes, it's a huge amount of payoff. I love the. For lack of a better word, it's very sentimental. And I think it's also to a degree, probably Sakaguchi saying goodbye to the series in some ways.
Oh crap. I didn't think of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think he stuck around. I think he was still there a little bit longer than this, but it wouldn't have been much longer than this. Because this was, I know this is maybe not his favorite of them, but it might be his second favorite. Yeah. And it definitely feels like he's sort of saying, goodbye to something. Like he's come full circle, in a way.
Well, what is his favorite? Do you know? Is it 7?
I think it's 4 or 6. It's not 7.
Oh, okay. It's funny how it seems like everyone else's favorite is 7. I think we talked about this some, but the nostalgia side of things. I was talking to that friend at work that I mentioned last episode, Gabe, and I guess 6. I think he said 6 is his favorite and kind of his 9 as it was for you because that was the first one he played. And he said he remembers, which I thought was an interesting anecdote. He remembers when 9 came out, the marketing around it was very much about returning to that classic 4, 5, and 6 feel. hence the stylization and the kind of more fairy tale aspects, because it had, 7 and 8 had been darker and more serious and all this stuff. And they actually, in 9, he says he remembers them leaning into that, like return to that era, which I thought was interesting that they kind of intentionally wanted, and maybe Sakaguchi did, wanted to kind of recapture 6 in some way.
I downloaded 6 for the Virtual Console today, so I may be playing that in the near future.
Wow, yeah, you have to report back on that.
I've never played that. I got all kinds of advice online for which version to play, and everybody was like, "Play the SNES version if you can," and that's what the Virtual Console is.
Yeah.
It's listed as Final Fantasy 3, but I think that's what it was called here in the U.S. Because I think 4, 5, and 6 were 1, 2, and 3 here.
But anyway, completely confusing all that stuff. Yeah, but
yeah, I know it's wild. But yes, I think that Final Fantasy 3 on the Wii on the Virtual Console is, and I was reminded, the Wii has all kinds of weird buying points stuff on it, just like the Xbox 360 used to have, or the original Xbox. Maybe.
Yeah, I haven't engaged with that in a long time.
No, I hadn't either.
A couple of quick notes I put down for kind of the ending section. I thought it was really cool when I was going around kind of doing my gear hunting. I was returning to all the cities and towns and stuff, and I was actually pretty impressed that they have new content for the state of the world at that point in those places, right? Because things have been destroyed, or characters are actually replying, to me about the events that had happened throughout the game. So there was just a good sense of place there. So that was one small thing. And then the other thing that I wrote down was, I think it's probably ultimately for me too little too late, but Zidane has won me over by the end.
Right.
My whole Bieber comments and all that stuff. That was
probably my biggest question, was whether the ending was able to convert you entirely, because I feel like it rests on him being likable, and I was so terrified in the last episode. I was like, oh man, he still doesn't like Zidane.
Yeah. And
I know
it was coming.
I knew it was coming, and I also knew that they build him up even more here at the end, like that. Those experiences he goes through in Terra kind of inform, kind of mature him very quickly, in a way. It makes him look at the world differently, and he becomes, I think his being such a rascal is so well motivated from, here's a guy whose adoptive dad beat him up whenever he was welcoming home. It was like the sort of home life that he had led him to be this snarky kind of pain in the ass kid. And I get where he was coming from, but I still knew but right on the horizon is, this big moment of him changing. And it really starts when he goes down that long hallway with all his buddies and has that melancholy music.
Yeah, that might be... Trying to think, that might be one of my favorite moments in the game. That I wrote that note down too. That I call it the gauntlet or whatever. But there was just this sense of camaraderie, and he was trying to push forward without them, but they weren't taking they weren't taking no for an answer. And I don't know. And I really liked the music there and stuff. So I thought that was nice. Yeah, I think my only criticism about it is that I just think it escalates his arc too quickly. Like they didn't. It kind of comes a little bit out of nowhere. But it doesn't come out of nowhere. I just wish it was more gradual.
Right.
For that character transition. The transitions were just too abrupt and stuff. And I mean, easy for me to criticize because, even on stuff that I work on, I'm not great at that same thing. It's a hard thing to do well. But all said and done, by the end, he did kind of win me over. And, just in life, selflessness is kind of an important thing to me. So when I see him being, more selfless and less selfish, which he was throughout the game, he definitely won me over by the end.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break, and then I guess we'll come back and talk about sort of our key takeaways and what we would take away from this game looking forward. And then we'll talk about what next, I guess, after that. Welcome back from the break. We've just been chatting about what we're going to talk about here in this second segment, but largely we want to do what we do at the end of each of our game sort of club sessions, is to talk about what we would take away, or what the pillars are of these games that we think are the sorts of things that you want to preserve. I mentioned last time that I figured I knew what yours was going to be, or at least one of yours, Tim, and that was that these are games that have lots of kind of interesting one-off moments. You want to talk about that? I mean, that's been a kind of theme of yours.
Yeah, I think it's been such a theme that because I just completely didn't know about that, and I underestimated that kind of their attention to detail on that. And I think we talked about a little bit in some of the previous episodes, maybe, but that notion of devoting resources, a team's resources, to one-off or specific things, I think was more common, in this era and before, potentially. I think it's harder to justify that these days in modern times. You tend to want to make systems that are more emergent and reusable and replaceable, right? And kind of part of the whole simulation of it, rather than this kind of specifically, depending on the genre, but RPG specifically.
Well, and also I think that there's 2 points on that. I mean, one, this was a team who had probably been using something similar, a sort of similar engine over these 3 titles. I mean, this was their last PS1 title, and the others sort of have a familiar feel. I mean, I know they tend to do a lot of work for each game, to make them different. So I'm not saying it was just like the same thing again and again, but it's like,
they're familiar with it.
I think of going from Starfighter to Jedi Starfighter and the types of missions that level designers were able to do in Jedi Starfighter with a fully functioning engine that they were now trying to push in new directions is part of it. The other part, too, is I think that, if you're going to involve a narrative, in your game, and so many games do, then finding ways to make that narrative play off in unexpected ways can be really, really valuable. So, here they take those moments, you love that sort of swinging cage example, but they take those moments that have a different feel and they just take and make a little something different out of it to serve the story, less than to do the other way around, to make the mechanics serve this, sort of front and center, the story to serve the mechanics. So I do really think that that's, kind of a great thing that these older games did. It was also cheaper to do.
That's what I mean. So, yeah. It was easier to justify, and you only needed 1 or 2 people to do those sorts of things at enough of a fidelity for this kind of generation. And I applaud them in that, because to your point, like, these typically are related to the linearity of the story moments that you're going through, and I'd rather that they were interactive than just watching a cinematic or something, right? So, or non-interactive, and so yeah, it's extra effort and work, but I guess I just underestimated how many of those they would do. Like, every game has some of those kind of specific moments that they will put their energy toward, but they're all over the place throughout the whole thing, and especially at the end when some of that stuff's happening. I guess some of that's non-interactive, though a lot of that is non-interactive. But,
well, even when it's not interactive, it's often kind of minimally interactive in that you're advancing dialogue and things like that. Mm-hmm. It's one of the
real
things,
time, yeah.
Right, and it's one of the things that I've found. Like, I was playing 13 kind of alongside this. One of the things I noticed was that I would check out a lot more of their cutscenes. I would just kind of drift away because I wasn't doing anything. I was just listening to them talk, and and it looks great and everything. I mean, it's an amazing looking game. It's just that I'm not interactively invested. I don't have to do anything. It's just going to play, and I'm not going to do a thing about it. And, they come with a fair amount of frequency in that game. There's just a lot of these little cutscenes, and too many probably. And I think that also kind of keys into the technical limitations of the time, since they're dealing with text and they want to make sure people read stuff, or have time to read stuff. They leave it up to you to press the button to advance it, just like any other dialogue. Yeah. And I think that works really, really well, and keeps just you enough. Minimally engaged. But you're not going to put the controller down because you still have work to do. Yeah.
That's a good point.
I think that works really well. The other thing, I guess, is the puzzly combat that we both like. That's a definite JRPG thing. I mean, it's sort of a Witcher 3 thing too, to be fair, for some of the bigger battles.
Yeah, and I think it's not having played any other JRPGs obviously than this one. Maybe they're doing it in 13 or some of the modern ones, but I think The Witcher is a modern, more accessible, and also. I'm playing on normal difficulty, so in the higher difficulties, I understand you really need to rock paper scissors it a lot more, but it's a more forgiving version of this.
Sure.
But I'm glad it's in Witcher because it definitely makes me use the systems and think about the systems differently than just button mashing my way through. For at least the big bosses and stuff.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I see this in bosses in other JRPGs as well, certainly other Final Fantasy titles. I'll talk about 13 in a moment, but of a similar era, PS2 game actually, but fairly early PS2 was Wild Arms 3, and that's sort of a Western feel JRPG. It's 4 gun-toting characters, going through this. It's great, great fun. But
I think I like that. I like the Westerns.
I'm going to be putting together a pile of games for Tim to play. So it's got this Western feel, and it's still on kind of a fantasy planet. There's a lot of JRPG stuff in there and magic and whatever. But it's the bosses that really are set apart, and they actually do a pretty good job of enemy design, of their aesthetics to be able to pick out what their probable weaknesses are. I mean,
that's cool. Like, I really wish there was more of that stuff without just having to scan. I think that would be cool to have better visuals tells there.
Right. And of course, that's a PS2 game. Maybe they gave that a little bit more thought, but it's also just that technically a little bit more advanced. I don't really know who to credit that with, and it has been a while since I played it. But when I played it, I do remember thinking, oh wow, the boss design here is really good, because often you'll be fighting a boss battle will be more than one character, and you'll have to focus fire in one place or another at different times during the battle, and it becomes this sort of cat and mouse game of trying to focus fire in the right places at the right time to get through the battle, or building up to your big attack, because it has a sort of similar mechanic as far as like a trance goes, so that you can do that massive damage at just the right time. And so there's a lot of that. The sort of random battles is no big deal. It's the same thing, but here it's here it's very similar as bosses go.
It really scratches my OCD itch, as far as I love. Though it gets me into trouble because I obsess too much over it. I really love min-maxing, especially. I think that's one of the reasons I love RPG so much as a player, because if you really get into the systems and you find all of the little nuances and kind of tricks and min-max that stuff, I get a lot of fulfillment out of that and gratification. And so I see that here, and again, like I mentioned already in this episode, time was kind of against me, but getting to the wall that I hit at the end, I know what I need to do, and at this sitting here right now, I want to go do it. You know what I mean? I have this urge where I want to go back and master this stuff and get the right gear and get the right abilities. And so I might set aside some time, over the next couple of months to do that, just to say I've done it. But it's a cool thing. I love that kind of stuff. And as far as a pillar goes, it's definitely, I've always heard this vaguely from like you and Reed and other people that I know that love JRPGs and Final Fantasy. And now having played it, I have a great new appreciation for that, how much they double down on that whole series of systems, and how a lot of games, they shy away from that because it is so hard to make accessible to people, but
right.
they really double down on it. And just like those examples, like the reflect thing we talked about, and then the healing an undead or using Phoenix down on an undead, those sorts of
right.
things where it's like, yeah, that's just how the numbers work, It's
right,
like,
right.
That's the way that the rock, paper, scissors work. So you should be able to do that.
Right. And I think in this game, I don't know that it ever happened to me, but I think you can get a status effect, which is zombie, which makes, right. Oh, it did. So probably you couldn't be healed at that point.
Right.
You would take damage from healing spells.
Right.
So
I found that out the hard way, but yeah.
Right. And that's the clue to be like, oh,
yeah, okay, right? Fair point. Yeah,
I think some of those things are in there. I don't think that ever happened to me, even though I bought a bunch of them magic tags or whatever it is that make the zombie go away. I think I never actually got that effect on me. But those are the sort of clues of like, oh, when these things happen to you, how you deal with it is sort of your clue of how to deal with it in battle at times. I mean, not always, but it does mean. Apparently Gizem Maluk or whatever, the early boss you had trouble with, mostly cast spells. And if you could silence that character, that would really, really help you. And as it turns out, I had, and I didn't remember this, but I had a silencing dagger equipped. And so that had actually happened to me. And that's why it was such a cakewalk for me and such a pain in the neck for you. And so those things, make a big difference, but I didn't connect those two dots at the time. Somebody had emailed about that, and I'm sorry I don't have your name at hand, but appreciate the feedback about that, because that's totally what happened to me. As I silenced, in the first one or two attacks with Zidane, I silenced that creature, and then I just kind of had to do enough damage, but I never was really in any danger after that. So,
yeah, that's a good point about teaching you the mechanics through that. Having that zombie effect on you. Unfortunately, that random, like you may not get it on you to teach you that. But then the other thing, like the reflect example, through the logic of how the systems were working, I don't think I would have thought to do that unless I had found that hint, because logically I would say, if I put reflect on a party member and then I cast on that party member, that it should just reflect back at me,
right,
on the person that cast it rather than onto the enemy.
Right. So how you would have discovered that though is you put reflect on somebody and then they take a bunch of damage. You try to heal them, and you end up healing the enemy. So
could be,
right. Yeah, that's happened to me. Not this playthrough, but that's how I learned about reflect back in the day.
Yeah.
Was that I tried to heal Zidane, and I was like, oh man, I just healed with a cure or a curaga, so thousands of points of healing to the enemy, and soon bit it after that.
Right.
What I was going to say about Final Fantasy 13 is that they actually do a weird thing with the battles that you get a certain number of stars, like a rating after each battle. Like literally every battle in the game, the battle report screen includes a star rating of 0 to 5 stars, of how well you did at this battle. So where that comes into play is they have these sort of Monster Hunter-like marks that you can go after in their overworld when you can get to that point in the game. And at that point, there's actually a trophy, I guess, for getting 5 stars on every single one of those, and there's like 60 or 70 of them, so there's a ton of them. But it really brings that puzzle aspect to the fore, because in order to do really well, it's basically how quickly you can take them down. In order to do that, you have to really understand how those creatures work. So you're not expected to kind of the first time you go up, to be able to do that. I mean, you probably will with some of them just kind of randomly, but in general, you're going to have to go and you're going to battle it, and you're going to go, okay, well, how do I make that faster? And you might have to think outside the box a little bit, and really work towards it. So
no, and that's good to hear that they have iterated on the formula, into the modern age, and that's exactly what I mean. Like giving people clear incentivization for that kind of thing, so when you're doing well, when you're doing poorly, and then when you're doing poorly, you can seek out goals to and the whys for that.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been a fun part of that game, and something that I'll probably return to once my carpal tunnel settles. Yeah, I've been bad.
Well, then don't they have like 3 versions of 3? Like, there's 2 sequels to 13 or something crazy.
That's correct. So I'm going to just stick with the first one for now.
Oh yeah,
and then we'll see.
I thought you'd finish. You're not done yet.
I finished the story.
Oh, you're going to do all the
right, but you can return to that save and then go return to the open world part of the game and do that stuff if you want. There's these portals.
Got it.
Do you live near an airport? What's going on out there?
No, it's some loud driver.
No kidding.
It's a boat, actually. Yeah.
Oh, a boat. There you go. Oh, yeah. You live near water. I should have thought.
Yeah.
Island man. All right. Well, any other takeaways that you want to mention?
2 quick ones. One that kind of relates to the one-offs, but the other thing that is interesting to me, and it sounds like maybe it's a Final Fantasy thing, maybe it's a genre thing, is I just wrote the note down, mixed experiences. And what I mean by that is I had also was kind of, intrigued and happily surprised, and kind of actually mixed still on my opinion of it, that they have so many different types of core experiences, mushed together. Because you have these direct control. I'm in a town or in a dungeon where I'm moving through the space in a real-time 3D with the pre-rendered backgrounds, experience where I'm kind of exploration mode, I guess I'll call it, or something. And then you have the real-time combat, which is like in these arenas that they make just for that. And
right.
Then you have this overworld that is a completely different engine or version of the engine, and they're flying around and exploring there. And I guess I'd kind of always third-hand heard about that and seen little videos here and there, but it's just such a funny thing. And I've been trying to think about if there's other genres that I like where that's the case, and maybe this is more of a result of the era, but it feels like more and more throughout the years, throughout the industry and kind of the history of gaming overall, we've been trying to constantly merge experiences so it feels like you're cohesively always in the same space. And I think of The Witcher, I think of, any modern game right now doesn't really change that very often.
Right.
You're always real time and you're always from a certain perspective. And here it's like, they're just not afraid to like mix and match and kind of throw you between these things. And it was very jarring for me at first, but I don't know if it's a pillar, but they're definitely like, they embrace that.
Yeah, they certainly do. And those are long standing, parts of this genre. But that was actually true on the Western side of the RPG fence at the time. You would,
I guess Ultima,
Ultima or a Might and Magic. Those Might and Magic games were the same way. At least the 1 or 2 that I played of that series.
That's fair.
I feel that wasn't uncommon at the time, just because you had different design goals for each one, and we weren't really necessarily trying to think of design in a holistic way. We were finding our way through this stuff, and then only later, I think, as the audience got bigger, or that we needed a bigger audience, that we started trying to find those holistic approaches just to make it more approachable.
Yeah, well. And it sounds like in 13's case, they start merging more of that stuff.
There's not really an overworld feeling thing. There's it's the same renderer. There are still there are still battles with battle arenas that are specifically built. It's also still the same renderer, so they all look the same. Yeah. It's just now you've got 3 characters and multiple enemies or whatever. But it's modal. It's still modal. It's just there are fewer modes in Final Fantasy 13.
I just think it's interesting, and I don't want to generalize with this statement, but I think it's interesting how, especially if 13 still has some of those modes, and I bet maybe 12 and 10 for sure do as well, how far they stick to those traditions, you know what I mean, that probably were established in the 1, 2, and 3 era or something. And
right.
And while I'm not trying to give more credit to Western games or anything, or Western RPGs, but I feel like people in the Western RPG scene kind of tried to push that stuff forward more quickly or something.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Rather than keeping with that tradition, and I actually, we've talked about how I'm also a big Metal Gear fan. I think he was the same way, right? He stuck to certain camera paradigms that he established in Metal Gear Solid 1 that he should have let go a long time ago, right? And he kind of, they pried them from his cold dead hands kind of thing.
Right.
And eventually he got there and the games were much better for it. But I don't know if it's just the tradition of it or the, dogmatism or what, but, it's cultural,
I think it's
right?
I was going to say, I think it's a more formal culture that way. And I mean, formal, not in terms of, interactions with other people, although it's also that often. But I meant just more sort of form, sticking to a form, and less likely to merge forms. I mean, that's an outsider's perspective because I'm certainly no Japanese expert. But that is a kind of my cultural sense, is that, they establish forms and this is the way this form is, and innovation inside that form is slow. And I mean, we see this with Nintendo too. To your point about that, the sort of different render modes and all that stuff, I sort of feel like character-based action games on the PS2 had a bit of this. I'm thinking of like Sly Cooper in particular, because there were multiple characters, and most of the time you were Sly Cooper, but then you might be the turtle or the hippo, and then you would have different types of gameplay, specifically when those characters were getting kind of front and center. So Bentley, the turtle, I can't remember the hippo's name off the top of my head, but so when Bentley would be hacking into some system, you'd go into like this arcade mode, which got progressively more. I mean, it was still real time and all that. I don't even remember if it was. I mean, it was a 2D plane. Even if it was 3D rendered, it was like a 2D arcade game, that just happened to have 3D rendering.
That,
and then with the hippo, you often had sort of these first person, sort of like rail shooters, really, to do those sections. So I feel like those things did happen, but they were more a consequence of wanting to vary the gameplay and not sort of like a formal requirement or a formal expectation. So.
For the era, and that makes sense. And I kind of looking back to your point about Ultima, and I think it's interesting. Kind of, I'm self-reflecting on my early, RPG days as a gamer, and I think that's also probably why I so quickly moved away from the Ultima games and into like Bard's Tale, Eye of the Beholder, those sort of first-person perspective, grid-based games, because I liked having things in that consistent way, And then when Ultima Underworld came out, having my mind blown about that real-time aspect. So anyway, Interesting little trip down memory lane.
And then I think you said you had one more.
And the last one was the other kind of. I'm betting it's part of the franchise as a pillar, but they're not shy about epic and cosmic spectacle and themes. By the end of this game,
that's where I was going to go.
I just like, holy crap! Like, just that last boss, and we're talking to this light in the sky, and they're talking about existence and fear, like all these, and they're just not afraid. And also just the summoning that I've heard about for years, right? My whole life. Oh, the summoning in Final Fantasy games. Yeah, it's a real deal. Like the effects are crazy. And for this era, like they know their stuff and they don't hold back. And, playing Witcher 3 at the same time, it's not epic. It's not like on this scale, right? And they talk about cosmic themes in The Witcher, but it's way behind the scenes and subtle. And Baldur's Gate and none of those games do. Like they think they do, but this stuff is like over the top cosmic, So I definitely appreciate that.
I think the only one in the Western canon that really goes to that level would be Planescape Torment. Because there you're literally dealing with all these kind of crazy godlike creatures, and you're in this world where ideas and thoughts, and the more people believe in a thing, the more realistic and real it becomes, and all that stuff, all that kind of heady philosophical stew that makes us love it so much. I was going to say that is definitely a cornerstone of this series. All these themes that you face, often these worlds that are kind of on the verge of crumbling or have already crumbled, especially in 7 and 8. One thing I wanted to tell you and blow your mind about was that Eiko, whatever her name is, however you pronounce that. I looked up a translation of that. And that word in Japanese means vicissitudes, like ups and downs, like as of fate. That's what that name means.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Obviously that's not something a Western audience would pick up on, but I was curious if it meant anything, and I looked it up a couple of weeks ago, and I was kind of holding it back for a time that it would make sense to throw it in.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Because there is one of these games where you literally the final boss is named Fate. It's like it's literally that on the nose. I can't remember if that's 7 or 8, but it's one of those, I believe. Might have been 10. I don't remember. They kind of the end battles tend to run together for me because it is that point where it has gotten so far from like day-to-day concerns that I just, like I said last time, I just have a hard time grabbing hold of that stuff and holding on to it.
Well, I lost track for sure. Like I just finished it tonight, right? So I don't know if I could actually recite it back to you right now, even though I just finished it. But I just have that general sense of cosmic kind of epic flavor, which I just, again, kind of handed to him for just going to the hilt on that stuff. And it makes, I guess, the one thing I was going to say that I worry about further, playing the franchise further, which I definitely will do at some point, is how do you one up yourself when you have every one of them? And again, I don't know if that's the case, but it sounds like it may be. When every one of them has this sort of, feeling toward this sort of epic feel, and maybe that's why they're named Final Fantasy. Every one of them really is that sense of finality. But I don't, it's like if everyone is the world is crumbling and you fight fate at the end, or some version of it, like it probably would get old, I would assume, but maybe not.
Yeah, I haven't found that it has for me, and I've. As you know, I've played a bunch of them. But I think that, they sometimes take little side steps that don't feel that way. I mean, I also like that the kind of end battle here is between really creativity, sort of in the form of free will, but the creativity of being able to create your own life for yourself against just this destructive force, of the universe of death and everything ending or whatever. And I do really like that. And it feels like, another sort of thing that an artist wants to talk about, is that I go out and I'm creating things, and I'm not letting the natural tendency towards entropy or death or destruction, to defer me from pursuing that. So, I do really feel like it's very personal in that way, even though it's at this epic, ridiculously epic scale, on the scale of these gods and forces. But But yeah, man, whenever you're ready, I have a stack of JRPGs I can send your way. I've kept them all. The only one I don't have anymore is Dragon Quest VIII, but Reed has that one, so you can hit him up.
Yeah.
All right,
I fear it.
I don't blame you. I had one email I thought we could read and address. I'm not going to read it in its entirety. It's from Bob Chesser. So thank you, Bob. He was talking about how Final Fantasy IX released this notably terrible play online service and strategy guide that was really, really unfair to the people who had bought it, in that it had you needing to look up things online literally on every page. And he mentioned Zelda 2 as well, because Nintendo had a call-in helpline that they were promoting, and he was wondering what we think about whether design choices are made in making these games to withhold information or not make some things clear, to be motivated by wanting to promote some new business interest, basically. Mm-hmm. In the case of this, play online service or whatever. I know we have some history with a company that had a helpline, but yeah, I mean, I'm curious to I'm not working under those pressures right now, but you might be. So.
Yeah, well, I think these days my initial personal answer would be I think these days the industry has grown up enough generally to where we've seen through that stuff and realized that it's better, because those sorts of even web hits and especially the strategy guides or anything like that, in the grand scheme of sort of the drops in the bucket, they're really not that big of an impact on the sort of essentially the bottom line. And so someone and another group like a marketing or something might, you have that question come up occasionally. It's usually very quickly shot down because the goal is to make, and especially these days, keep the player, in the game and having a good accessible time as much as possible in the game. You right. Don't want, in fact, especially as games are moving into different business models over the years, and people are trying out different things, you don't want them to leave the game, right? You want the answers to be right there. And so having them so anyway, that's modern times. But back in the day, I definitely remember conversations where people would ask that question or even use strategy guides as a crutch. It's sort of like even designers, it was like, yeah, well, this isn't quite as clear as I'd like it to be, but we're going to have a strategy guide. So if people really get stuck, they can go look there. And
right.
And that was often a battle where myself or lead LD or somebody would say, Kevin or something would say, no, we better fix this because we only sell a few hundred or thousands of those things, and not everyone's going to be. And the last thing we want is for people to be frustrated.
Right, to be frustrated and stuck. Yeah, and I was kind of alluding to LucasArts as a company that had a helpline established in its adventure game days, but they had established it because the games themselves were so difficult. They didn't make the games difficult so they could establish a helpline, right?
Yeah.
It was a response to a need from the players rather than sort of a business decision that impacted the design process. And I can definitely remember arguing with Troy Mashburn about making that one level in the first campaign or first third of Republic Commando easier because it was just too hard.
Yeah.
And him being able to do it really easily, and said, well, if you just put this guy here and this guy here, and I'd say, yeah, okay, Troy, that's great. You designed it. You know exactly how to play it. I have spent an hour trying to get past this,
yeah.
But the counterpoint is that I know that Final Fantasy X, and we were talking about this offline, Final Fantasy X made it impossible to get the ultimate weapon if you opened, I think there were 3 particular chests in early levels that if you open this chest, that has eliminated your ability to get the ultimate weapon, and there's no way to know it. There's no indication whatsoever. You would just have to say have a strategy guide, which, oh hey, by the way, $19.99 on Amazon. You know, so it definitely happened. I think you're right though that it's not as common these days. You know, though, you know, Half-Life 2 launched with Steam, right? You know, it's not entirely gone.
You mean as far as associating a product with another initiative?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm sure
because you had to authorize it. I think you actually literally had to have Steam installed in order to play Half-Life 2.
Oh yeah, and I remember.
That was a big deal. That was people were pissed,
right?
Yeah,
we're like, what is going on? This is insanity. And now it's, you know, we love it and we've forgiven, and it's an accepted thing. Yeah, I mean, it's fair that there are probably new versions of that question that is not coming to me right now, that where there is some initiative, you know, that is related to goals you or designs that you're intentionally changing. I just, you know, I think overall.
Oh, and I think it happens in a lot of small ways. You know, it's like, oh, if you pre-order from this store, you get this in-game reward that you can't get otherwise. There's lots of little things like that. I don't think they really tend to impact the core experience. I do remember there was maybe it was Dead Space 2 that had some microtransactions around their guns, I want to say.
2 or 3 maybe, yeah.
I can't remember which one. I mean, so these things do kind of come in. They tend to be more experiments, you know, with business models that, you know, that they're going to try out to see if they, you know, because games have gotten expensive, and there are times at which they sort of leap in expense, and you're kind of hoping the audience is there when you come out, because they are so expensive to build. So those sorts of things still happen at that level, but I think it's, you know, it's more of a, you know, well, we got to keep the lights on, you know, let's, you know, we were thinking about this new thing. What do you say we try it in this limited way in this new game?
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you, Bob, for your question, and you might ask where you can send such questions, and I'm willing to tell you. You can send them to devgameclub@gmail.com. You can also ask on Twitter and stuff, but that's only 140 characters, so they have been tending to come in a little bit longer. So I wanted to let people know.
Very nice segues there.
Yeah.
Really quick before I forget, I have to ask: the Bobby Corwin is the name of the chocobo in the Black Mage Village. When he grows up, did you? I
did see that. Yes, yeah, Bobby Corwin.
What is that all about? Well, who's Bobby Corwin, and why did they name the chocobo Bobby Corwin?
It is not so much that it is Bobby Corwin. It could have been Boris Conley, or I'm sure there are other things it could have been. What that I guess refers to is Boko is a common chocobo name in the series, so it's kind of a call out to Boko being
Bobby okay,
Boco, yeah. That's what I gathered. I had the same question. I had to look it up. I did not know that off the top of my head.
Okay, interesting.
I think that must have been from earlier Final Fantasies, because I can't remember it in 10 or 12 or certainly not 13. Where the chocobos don't seem to speak or anything like that, but or have a language. You know, there's no. They still have treasure hunting and stuff, but they don't. It's possible that it was there and I missed it too, because I was definitely not chasing that stuff down as much when I played those games.
Another interesting little tiny thing. After I was doing my gear hunt around all the towns, I went back to Dali. To see, you know, if there are any items there. And I remembered I had that coffee bean or whatever that is. So I was I'm going to go look for that Morid guy because he wants this maybe. because it's one of the key items. And I go in there to where I think he was, and I think I met his daughter, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he just died in the earthquake.
Oh wow,
he's gone." So I couldn't, like, I lost the ability to do anything with that thing because in the events of the big, catastrophes that had been happening, that character died in an earthquake. So I was like, wow, good for you guys. That's pretty badass.
Yeah, that's nuts. Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild. Wow, this game's got a lot in it, man. There's a lot in this game.
Yeah, and I missed so much. So, maybe someday I'll go back and go deeper. But
maybe I'll go and play a third time.
Oh, geez.
I know. All right. The last thing we want to wrap up, I guess, is what we're doing next time. And the short answer is we really don't know. So we are, as we said a couple times throughout the episode, we are recording this just a few days after we normally record because we are both occupied with other things this coming weekend. And so we're a few days ahead of schedule. I literally just released the podcast yesterday morning, and we're recording a new one today. So, yeah, so it's going to be over the weekend and emails and things like that to figure out what we're doing next. We are hoping to get a guest. We're not making any announcements on that front yet because we have feelers out and things, but we don't have any sort of response at all. But that would be great if we can nail that down. Mm-hmm. E3 is also coming up.
Yeah,
I think that would be our guest week, so that might actually throw in whole new wrinkles for that as well. And we also haven't decided on a next game. So the place to find this stuff is going to be on Twitter. I may, if we know anything by the time this comes out, I may just add a short recording at the end to do so. So listen up for that. I'll have just added myself on, just me talking. But I suspect we won't because we're both very, very busy between now and when the podcast actually releases. So
yeah, and if anyone has any suggestions or ideas, we always like to hear about that too.
Absolutely. In the meantime, you can find me at Brett_Duville on Twitter, and he's over
at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
With the JR at the end, you can see his little Yoda mug there on his profile. The podcast is at Dev Game Club, and of course at devgameclub.com. And that's it for us for this time and for Final Fantasy IX. Thanks so much for joining us. Good night.
Good night.